From the series that brought you
I'm really feeling it!
And Tits on a Stick, the newest entry has been released, Xenoblade Chronicles 3. After 300 plus hours of playtime, I have come to understand the many different aspects of this game and now have the ability to answer one particular question. Is Xenoblade 3 a must play? Let's find out. For those who aren't aware, Xenoblade Chronicles is a JRPG series which was created by Monolith Soft and published by Nintendo. The series focuses on expansive open worlds, breathtaking narratives, and a real-time combat system, providing the ultimate way to experience each game's adventure. This review will primarily look at the most recent entry in the series, Xenoblade Chronicles 3. So if you like this style of video and want to see a review for the other Xenoblade games, then let me know in the comments below, and I will get started on those as soon as possible. Also, I'd appreciate it if you'd help me out with the YouTube algorithm by leaving a like on this video and subscribing to the channel for more Xenoblade content in the future. Finally, this video will contain Xenoblade 3 spoilers, so keep an eye out for this icon in the top left corner and proceed with caution. You have been warned. Now this video might end up being a lot longer than my normal videos, so if you want to hear my thoughts and opinions on a certain topic, then please feel free to use the timestamps in the description to skip ahead. With all that out of the way, let's start this review off by taking a look at the story of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Eye-opening, compelling, and impassioned. Those are the three words I would use to describe Xenoblade 3's story. The narrative features 6 soldiers from the two nations of Keves and Agnes, who are locked in an endless war, hoping to steal the life energy from one another, which is required to prevent them from perishing themselves, extending their mere 10-year lifespans. After engaging one another in a special operation to destroy an unknown target, the 6 main characters' lives are turned upside down as they begin to reconsider the truth of their world. Being categorized as traitors to both nations at once, the party deserts the fight, seeking salvation from the land where the Great Sword stands out. And it's during this journey that you'll experience the highs and lows of Xenoblade 3. The series prides itself on its ability to immerse a player within an incredibly detailed narrative, and this game is no different. I felt like I was a part of Aionios, living and breathing within the world through our main characters. Experiencing the struggles and ordeals that each soldier is forced to undertake helped me to truly appreciate how fragmented this world really is. The storytelling is also incredible, hooking me right into this game and addicting me to the narrative, forcing me to discover more and what comes next. However, this could be viewed as a negative, as ordinarily, Xenoblade's side quests don't impact the game's story all that much, merely giving context to minor plot points. But in Xenoblade 3, side quests serve as a way of explaining many different fundamental features, resulting in a lack of understanding for those who skipped them. Fortunately though, the side quests of Xenoblade 3 are some of the best there have ever been, which is why I recommend completing them whenever they are available. Even so, the narrative is written masterfully, but that doesn't mean the game's story doesn't have flaws. Sadly, there are a few moments during the adventure that can feel a bit tedious and boring, mainly during some of the earlier, quieter moments of the game. Not everything has to be intense, fast-paced action, but I've liked to have seen a bit more development during this downtime, fleshing out our main characters and taking a closer look at the world they live in. I fear the latter half of the game suffers from a completely different, more severe issue, however. During the final 2 chapters, there were many poorly made decisions on what should be required for story progression. Other than exploring a bland, uninteresting and tiny area whose purpose is only to retain the Cloud Key, you are forced to backtrack through the immense Aionios, searching for mere shards of metal, which narratively doesn't make much sense and is anything but fun to play through. This results in the majority of Xenoblade 3's ending feeling rather lackluster, wasting all of the time and effort that was put in before and leaving a sour flavour overall. On top of that, at times, the story structure just feels straight up weird, with chapters ending in rather strange places. There were many moments where I was expecting a chapter to end, only for it to do so 2 areas later, or chapters ending happening right in the middle of major cutscenes, splitting it up between 2 chapters. This doesn't really impact the storytelling all that much, but it can delay you from exploring the side content, due to never feeling like there's an appropriate break in the story. Nevertheless, even despite these flaws, Xenoblade 3 still manages to be a roller coaster of emotions as we see our protagonists succeed and fail to change their world for the better. Each struggle they encounter grants them the opportunity to grow and evolve, making each challenge exciting and engrossing. There were many times when I was on the edge of my seat, intoxicated by the magnificence that was unfolding on screen. There are many memorable moments throughout this game, whether it be Mio's surprise punch or the homecoming ceremony during the eclipse. Each moment is addictive and makes me crave to see more. Overall, I adore the plot for Xenoblade 3. The narrative is written masterfully, even using clever misdirects in the beginning to surprise unsuspecting players who are unaware of the story's true direction, plunging us deeper into the adventure of Xenoblade 3. Yes, the game has a few poorly thought out moments, making many like myself doubt the quality of the journey we have just undertaken due to it being fresh in our minds, but the real ending itself is breathtaking to behold. The way Monolith brings each character to life, emotionally connecting us to all of them, tugs at my very heartstrings and makes this one of the most emotive games I have ever played. I'm not ashamed to say that I was crying like a baby on multiple occasions, and not many games have done that to me before. Xenoblade 3 is story driven like no other and is unforgettable to those who have experienced it, which is why I can't recommend this game enough for those who have not played it before. It's an adventure like none before that will truly leave you yearning for more. When it comes to characters in Xenoblade, there's one thing that I feel Monolith Soft does better than all the rest: variety. It's through this great variety of characters that Monolith are able to deliver such a compelling and interesting story, and Xenoblade 3 is no different. The protagonist of this game, Noah, might feel a little generic and bland towards the beginning of the game, but he soon grows out of that as he attempts to seize his future with his own hands. It's due to his doubts and how strongly he cares for his allies and friends that the game starts in the first place, desiring to change this world for the better. His determination to uncover the truth and feelings he develops for Mio are what drives him in the story forwards, becoming the bridge that unites the rest of the cast together and leading the others to a brighter future. Speaking of which, Mio is the second protagonist of this game, and she makes up for Noah's shortcomings. Her bright personality and indomitable will provide the entertainment and strength that the group needs. She fights to make a better future for the others, selflessly disregarding her own limited lifespan in the hope that her friends can achieve what she doesn't have the time to. This does lead to her bottling up her feelings, however, not wanting to burden her friends with her own feelings and receive their sympathy, resulting in her struggling ahead alone. Lanz and Senna are the game's two meatheads, being focused more on their brawn than lack of brains. They support the group in their own way, whilst also giving their role to Noah and Mio, whom they feel strongly for. Even so, both are a little emotionally unstable due to their past histories, but in a way, this becomes their strength, and is what allows the both of them to act and do what must be done. That just leaves Uni and Taion, who act as the wild cards of the party. Both are diverse and interesting characters, who simply just want to keep everyone safe. Their expertise in their respective fields provides substantial support to the group as they attempt to protect one another from outside forces, the whole while being an absolute joy to see on screen. By far, these two have some of the best character interactions, whether it's them being incredibly wholesome or downright hilarious, making the whole game that much more enjoyable. Ultimately, my personal favourite character ended up being Mio for her many amazing and incredible moments. I was shocked by how much I adored her in the early game, relishing her hilarious moments with Noah and everyone else, until eventually we reached chapter 4. From this point onwards, Mio was just in another league compared to the other characters, dealing with and overcoming the mental anxiety from her limited lifespan. To me, she ended up becoming the main protagonist over Noah, even though he ultimately began to fill that role later on. That said, this isn't put a downer on how good Noah was also. He grew into a very respected and responsible man who would just try his best to achieve his goals. Even so, what I actually liked the most about him was how unhinged he was. You never catch Shulk or Rex swearing their mouths off at the enemy, but Noah has such moments.
You're full of shit! You never tried, you're just a coward! What did you...
It only happens a couple of times, but I'm taken aback by each and every one, seeing how much drive he has and how far he is willing to go to save his friends. The others were great as well though, in my opinion. Uni was a big sister character to the whole party, being there whenever someone needed her, and just keeping morale high. At least when she wasn't swearing. From my perspective, she was just fun to see on screen, whether she was snuffing her mouth off to everybody or not. Her partner, Tyon, was also great for many of the same reasons. On the surface, he would display his normal persona of being the intelligent one in the group, planning routes and trying to protect everyone through his strategies, but occasionally, this persona was broken. Every now and then, Tyon dropped this facade, and we get to see his true self, and it's great each and every time it happens, especially in this scene. That was fantastic. On the other hand though, Lanz and Senna left a little to be desired, sadly. Don't get me wrong, overall I thought they were both great characters, and I enjoyed my adventure with them, but after finishing the game, I just felt like something was missing from their own personal stories. This could have been simply solved by their side stories however, which was setting up for what I was hoping for anyway. Senna didn't really need all that much, and I was just hoping that she would reflect and backtrack once more on her similarities and relationship with Shania, but considering she isn't even the main focus of her own side story, I'll let her off the hook. Lanz, on the other hand, I wanted a bit more out of. Lanz was very much stuck in his ways, believing that the right thing to do in his world was fight, even though not everybody was cut out for it. And after meeting the street performer, I hoped he would reflect on his mistakes and teach Garvel the same thing, that not everybody has to fight, and they can do what they're good at, just showing that Lanz had that potential for growth. But sadly, it just didn't happen, and it's why I think Lanz is the weakest out of the 6 protagonists. On a side note though, I think that all of the side stories for the main characters should have been required for story progression. Each one adds so much depth and context to each character that it would have made each feel that more fulfilling and fill in some of the weaker areas of the narrative. Uni's side story even changes cutscenes depending upon when you have completed it or not, and can even add an additional boss fight towards the end of the game, so it's a mystery why they aren't required in the first place, but oh well. Amazingly though, on top of the incredible main cast of characters this game has, it also manages to have a great lineup of side characters. Ethel, Kamuravi, Monica and even Boliaris are all great characters, each one having their own quirks that result in them being interesting to see turn up on screen and making them deserve a lot more screen time than what they got. Additionally, each of the 20 plus heroes are all well thought out and interesting in their own way, each getting fleshed out via the many side quests that they all participate in. That just leaves the antagonists for Xenoblade 3, being the Mobius and Zed. Overall, I wasn't actually all that impressed by Mobius as villains, as I found that most of the time they just weren't very interesting and I didn't feel compelled to defeat them. This is largely due to the sheer amount of Mobiuses that you face during your adventure, and over time, it just begins to get repetitive and boring. All the different designs were nice and all, but it just began to feel like a monotonous grind of discovering a new colony, facing off against a new console, defeating them and destroying the flame clock before rinsing and repeating. This meant that each encounter started to get predictable, and I merely began waiting to see which console I would face off against next. For some of the story consoles, this formula does work though, as I found that P, O and K were all engaging villains in their own right, and narratively, it makes sense for them to be defeated on their first encounter. But from this point onwards, they just get rather dull. I feel that this is when the true Mobiuses like X and Y should have then stepped up to the plate. Considering their story importance, both show up rather late and do little to leave a lasting impression, which is why I think they should have been present in every main character's side story, assuming that they are story required like I mentioned before. This way, the players would have had a constant reminder of who we're aiming to defeat, along with us growing familiar with both of these Mobius, who admittedly are rather interesting when you get into the nitty-gritty of them. This may not have even been required, however, if Zed was actually a prominent character. For the most part, he just sits there, watching events play out at the theatre as we gradually progress further and further towards him, without a hint of worry, desperation, or panic anywhere on him. He's basically completely emotionless, which would have worked and made the one scene where he smiles that more ominous if the rest of Mobius had actually been interesting and compelling as we built up to him. I do, however, still really like the concept of Zed. The idea of all all these negative emotions that rest in the back of the mind of everyone congregating and merging into one to form Zed is actually kinda cool, although it doesn't make much sense on how he actually became a being in the first place. Even so, Zed as an idea is pretty neat, and it shows that there was a lot of potential there, even though it simply didn't deliver in the end, unfortunately. That's why I was expecting one of the better villains of Xenoblade 3 to actually be the final boss, like N. Admittedly, I did expect N to betray Zed, absorb his power, and turn into some super being to finish off the game, but I'm still content with how N's story finished. Him along with M are great examples of how good the Mobius could have been, ranging from his outbursts of sheer rage to the moment he was drowning in regret. If more of the consoles had backstories like this, then Xenoblade 3 would have been a much more interesting game. Wild Ride also falls into the category of good villains in my book, as unlike most, we have multiple encounters, and the two who make him up are actually pretty cool. I do really wish that Dirk could have been a version of Mumkar who had those past memories from Xenoblade 1, and yes, I know it doesn't make much sense and I don't know how it would have worked out, but I really wish that happened. At the end of the day, both of them do a great job of being terrifying villains and actually prove to be a challenge for us on most occasions, making their defeat all that more sweet in the end. Even with the efforts of these few good villains though, I still felt that the overall antagonists of Xenoblade 3 were lacking, and I was hoping for more. Maybe the DLC story will change my mind and make me see this in a different light when that comes out in 2023, but for now, they could have been better for sure. Xenoblade 3's world is a combination of both of the previous game's worlds, being Xenoblade 1's Bionis and Mechonis, as well as Xenoblade 2's Ulrest. Merged together, they form the landmass that is known as Ionios, and remnants of the previous worlds can be seen throughout. This world is teeming with life, ranging from the diverse flora of Ionios to the dangerous monsters that live deep within its caves. Normally, you'd expect me to adore Ionios due to how much I love and enjoy playing in the worlds of the previous games, but woefully, I'm not actually that big of a fan of this game world. Now, it's not awful, and there are many great areas within it, but Ionios simply feels lacking, like it's missing something. Compared to the previous games, there wasn't a single area that took my breath away, requiring me to stop for a moment to take in and appreciate my surroundings, like Sator Marsh or Uriah. The closest we got in Xenoblade 3 was at the Great Sword's base, but that area is tiny and literally only serves as an introduction to Sword March. Speaking of which, excluding the fact that each area is now broken down into regions, I could swear that each individual location is smaller than areas from the previous games. Bigger doesn't necessarily mean better, but in terms of Xenoblade areas, I find that the larger areas tend to have more majesty within them and tend to be more enjoyable to explore. On top of all that, Xenoblade 3 also has some of the worst world design I have seen in a while, with the most evident being Captacorn Peak. I mentioned this earlier, but this area is bland, boring, and there is quite literally nothing to do there, with the only real purpose of this area being that it's where the Cloud Keep is hidden. As such, it just feels like a complete waste of an area, especially with the potential that this place had. Monolith has normally got a great track record in terms of snowy areas, with Valak Mountain and Tantal being some of the most beloved areas in their respective games, but this just makes Captacorn Peak all that much more of an insult to snowy areas. I can't express enough how much I dislike this area and how much of a waste of space it feels. It's not all negative though, as at times there is some good world design. I'm still upset that Ionios didn't turn out to be a true open world like Mira, but the region system is a nice compromise when it's done right. The best region in my opinion is the Fornis one, being one of the larger ones and having lots of diversity across its different areas. I like how we can go from the desert-like barren wastelands to the lush and bright plains in an instant. On top of that, it's also the only one where you can get up high and practically look over the entirety of the region, obtaining some of the most breathtaking views within this game, likely the reason they kept on showing it off in all the trailers. The Cadencia region isn't bad either, but I'm going gonna do an IGN and say there's a bit too much water to make it as fun to explore. Surprisingly, I also really like all of the colonies designs as well, the city included. I don't know how, but they all do a great job of representing what the people living there are like, immersing myself within the world even more. Most of the Phoroneses are used in interesting ways, as well as with us being able to enter some, climb on others, and just generally explore around them, making each one feel unique and a blast to look around. Besides, whilst Ionios might not be the best world from a gameplay perspective, narratively, it's still fantastic. Concepts like the Black Fog and Annihilation events really add a lot of depth to the world, and the truth that Ionios is frozen in time is just the cherry on top. I'd guess that Ionios was designed more so to support the narrative of the story than to actually be a fun area to explore, which would explain some of the janky level design, and whilst I don't hate this idea on paper, in practice it left a lot to be desired. The Pentelis region, for instance, had so much potential, but came up short in so many areas. Aside from it being the most linear area in the game, the place just feels boring, with there being so little to actually explore off of the beaten path, and there is literally only one route to move from area to area. Monolith Soft should have definitely added loads of different caves within the Orion tunnels, making the area feel like a labyrinth and having many different exits available to access other parts of the region. Additionally, not being able to access the interior of most buildings within Mac the Wildwoods is also a massive waste, as it could have served as a hub to move from area to area. I mean, come on, how hard would it have been for them to let us get to Mactha through this building instead of taking the long way round? So yeah, Xenoblade 3's Ionios is overall pretty disappointing. I had quite high expectations for this game world, and it's a real shame to see most of them all fall flat. Ultimately, the world map isn't awful, and there are some locations which are interesting and cool to discover for the first time, and that cannot be taken out of consideration, but I didn't feel that this was enough to offset all of the other issues that I have with Ionios. At the end of the day, it's definitely not unplayable, and there are moments that I enjoy, but it simply won't be getting close to my favourite Xenoblade world anytime soon. When it comes to gameplay, Xenoblade 3 has got you covered. You could enjoy the amazing lineup of side quests that this game has to offer, or immerse yourself within the stories of each hero character. But ultimately, the main form of gameplay you're all going to be interested in is the combat. Xenoblade games use a real-time combat system based upon auto-attacking and art systems. Just like Ionios, Xenoblade 3's combat takes aspects from both Xenoblade 1 and 2, with Kevis character classes possessing arts that charge over time, and Agnes character classes having arts that are charged via auto-attacking an enemy. When you factor in additional mechanics such as fusion arts, talent arts, chain attacks, and your Ouroboros forms, Xenoblade 3's combat may appear to be overly technical and confusing at first glance, but don't be alarmed, it's all rather simple. For once, Monolith Soft actually did an amazing job of teaching the combat mechanics through their tutorials, which is invaluable for new players who are picking this game up for the first time. Each different mechanic is thrown at you over time, giving you a chance to familiarise yourself with each to easily understand each aspect of the combat. Once you have unlocked every mechanic, the combat does admittedly get a bit more complex, and a whole lot crazier, especially with 7 party members on screen at once, but I just find this adds to the fun of Xenoblade 3. Even so, once you understand how everything works properly, you'll notice how much depth there is to the combat, and how much flexibility you have via changing around your classes and heroes, and it's what leads me to believe without a shadow of a doubt that this is the best combat system that has ever been implemented into Xenoblade. Speaking of which, heroes were a great inclusion into this iteration of Xenoblade. By themselves, heroes add so much variety to the combat through their different chain attack orders and arts, as well as being an amazing support on the battlefield. Lacking in healing due to running the double Signifer strat? Use Voldy to have an extra healer on the team and stay topped up. Only got one tank on the team? Choose a defender hero to help you out and pick up some of the slack. Lacking in DPS? No? Yeah, that's not really an issue in this game, but attacker heroes can be some of the most fun to use. Heroes already sound great, right? And we haven't even mentioned their classes yet. Each class adds so much variety to the combat and allows for so many different strategies to be used that the combat never gets boring, and with the addition of the Soul Hacker class, it might never ever get boring. It isn't all sunshine and rainbows though, sadly, as there is one aspect of the combat that I'm not a huge fan of so far, and that pertains to debuff resistance. Put frankly, debuff resistance in this game is way too high. It's not so bad in the early game, but once you start to reach the end game content, it's near impossible to land any debuffs. This not only drastically limits the availability of certain classes, like Machine, Assassin or Tactician, from being effective in combat, but also increases the difficulty for certain fights through the roof, as Break is considered as a type of debuff, making it near impossible to ever start combos. This is not only frustrating when you're trying to get a launch off so that you can do extra damage during a chain attack, but also sucks some of the fun from the combat. It does prevent topple locking though, which admittedly is a good thing, but I have no doubt that one of the future DLC heroes will possess a master skill that reduces enemy resistances to debuffs. But for now, this is the only major issue that I have with the combat. Other than the combat though, the gameplay is still fantastic. I have mentioned it a few times, but side quests are just amazing in this game. I haven't finished them all yet, and so I'm not sure if this game will beat out Xenoblade X for having the best side quests, but so many of them feel so amazing and memorable so far. We get to explore the cinematic universe of Doran and Bam Bam, search the world for 7 Noppon who really like MC Hammer You Can't Touch This, and even help build Doric the giant robot. Each side quest just simply feels great and like it really fits into the world and theme of Xenoblade 3. Even so, there is just one more aspect of the gameplay that I don't like, and it's the fecking endgame grind. Now this is a JRPG, and therefore grinding for items is something you'd expect to do, but Xenoblade 3's rarity system just makes this so freaking annoying. This system alone just bugs me, as not only do we need to get lucky enough to get the right item we need, but it also needs to drop in the correct rarity. Now, getting a certain item in a certain rarity to drop once isn't too bad. Getting 10 more or so of that same item also isn't too bad. But when you require 150 items in different rarities to make one gem, it gets really freaking tedious. Thank God for the existence of Noppon coins, or this grind might feel unbearable. Overall, the gameplay for Xenoblade 3 is excellent. I have a few nitpicks here or there, but who doesn't? The combat is the best it's ever been, with some of the most complex and interesting mechanics ever introduced, like chain attacks, which require a fair bit of forward thinking and planning to make the most out of. The combat, gameplay and side quests are going to keep me playing this game for a good while, and I'm already getting excited to gear up for my second playthrough, where I'll get to do it all over again. Now then, up to this point, I've largely been pretty positive about most things, haven't I? But I wasn't joking when I chose those words in the thumbnail. Once I finished the game, I was genuinely torn as to if this game was a true masterpiece or a huge disappointment, and for a while, I was leaning towards the latter. It's possible that I had my expectations way too high for this game, but in most circumstances, this game actually exceeded my expectations. In others, however, I simply felt like some things were absent from the game that should have been here in the first place. The biggest example of this was the lack of any returning characters. Now yes, Melia and Nia do both return in this game, but they don't count. They were shown off in the very first trailer, way back in February, and with how this game was marketed, I was hungry, waiting for somebody to show up. I didn't mind who, and it didn't have to be anything major, but I was craving somebody's epic entrance, after how this game had been built up and marketed as a sequel. Now I disagree with the sentiment that because no one else showed up, it's a bad game, and I get that adding returning characters could have taken the spotlight off of our new protagonists, but I still just wanted to see somebody. Zeke being the leader of the city and the reason everyone wears eye patches, or Dromark guarding the Cloud Keep from outside forces and monsters. Just something that would have been cool to see. A little bit of fan service. Again, the lack of anybody doesn't make this game bad, and I'm actually kinda happy that some people like Alvis or Rex weren't present, as it wouldn't have made sense for the plot, but overall, I just wanted to see someone. Sadly, this wasn't the only thing that led me to feel disappointed in this game. One of the more common complaints I have seen is that there is a lack of explanation in this game, or put another way, Xenoblade 3 doesn't explain jack shit. Much like many of you, I was also left unsatisfied with much of the lore, not understanding many of the concepts and plot devices that had been built up throughout the game. Admittedly, this style is much more like the older Xeno games where things aren't explained as thoroughly and are left up to the player to discover and understand them, but I am growing to appreciate this style more and more each and every day I learn about Xenoblade 3, but at the same time, I feel that there aren't enough simple explanations within this game, laying down the breadcrumbs that would have led us to understand each concept. For example, I believe that Nia should have stated, "You might be familiar of this phenomenon through the Annihilation event," during her exposition dump when talking about the worlds merging and cancelling one another out. It would have been subtle, but just enough I feel to nudge us into the right direction of discovering and understanding what this plot element that was set up at the start of the game truly means. The reality is though, by the end of Xenoblade 3, I was still left confused as to why Uriah was destroyed in the first place, and that really shouldn't have happened. So there's a few final things that I just want to talk about before giving my overall conclusion for this game, and one of those things is the music. Xenoblade 3 probably has the best soundtrack of any Xeno game, with the majority of songs fitting so well into the themes and messages that this story is trying to present. I was initially hesitant of the flute being a prominent instrument used in the soundtrack, but it actually works perfectly, allowing for an amazing range and depth of different sounds that convey the necessary emotions. Admittedly, I don't think this is the best soundtrack to just simply listen to in your own time, but when put into the context of the game, it soars miles higher than any game before. Not every song is phenomenal, as the majority of the area themes tend to seem a little unimaginative and don't seem quite as memorable as others, but there are by far more good songs than bad ones. I also want to add a little bit about the DLC story, coming at the end of 2023. It's very possible that the addition of this extra story could change and fix some of the issues I have about Xenoblade 3, resulting in my overall opinion changing, hopefully for the better. If Torna is anything to go by, this side story could be incredible and give us the context to the questions that were left unanswered in the main game. So if and when my opinions change, I'll make sure to update you all sharply. Personally, I'm hoping for a sequel, but all the details on that is for another video. So, time for the verdict. What do I think about Xenoblade 3? Well, for a little while there, Xenoblade 3 had me scared, thinking it was gonna be one of my least favourites in the series. But alas, after talking it over with many different people, I have come to a conclusion. Xenoblade 3 is a Xeno game like no other, and therefore shouldn't be thought as one. When applying the definition of a Xeno game that's in my mind, it comes up short in many areas, but abandoning this fake persona allows me to see the truth and what Xenoblade 3 really is. This is a phenomenal game, with an incredible narrative and an extremely detailed world, which just simply requires you to have a huge brain to understand completely. There's a couple of nitpicks I have here or there, but overall, I love this game, and whilst it wasn't what I expected, that doesn't mean it's a bad game. Once you understand all of the finer details within this world and discover the true meanings behind many of the new concepts introduced, I find that Xenoblade 3 has a brand new light to it, which arguably puts it above the older games, and that's why I would say that Xenoblade 3 is an absolute must play if you haven't already. Well, that pretty much wraps up my review of everything to do with Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I hope you have enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you have, I once more ask you to click that subscription button and notification bell, as we're aiming for 10,000 subs by the end of 2022, and only you can help me to achieve that goal. Even so, I appreciate you all for watching this far into the video and hope to see you in the next one. This is JB, signing off.